It was just after dusk when retired Marine Jack Turner heard a weak scratch at his front door, a slow, dragging sound that didn't match any animal he knew. He grabbed his flashlight, opened the door a crack, and felt his heart stop. There, barely able to stand, was the old German shepherd who had watched over this neighborhood for years. His fur was soaked with blood, one ear torn, and deep claw marks slashed across his side. He collapsed into Jack's arms before the flashlight even hit the ground. Jack knelt in shock, trying to find where the wounds began and ended, his breath turning to fog in the cold air. But then the shepherd lifted his head, eyes clouded with pain, and looked behind him into the darkness. Jack turned his flashlight and nearly dropped it. Two tiny hands gripped the edge of his porch. A child, maybe 5 years old, crawled into the light, shivering violently, a dirty blanket wrapped around fragile shoulders. The shepherd forced himself upright despite the agony, limping to stand between Jack and the child, still protecting, still guarding, still refusing to fall. "What happened out there?" Jack whispered, voice shaking. The shepherd stared into his eyes with a message Jack didn't need words to understand. "They're coming. We're not safe. Help us before they return." Before we begin, make sure to subscribe, like this video, and turn on notifications. It helps us bring you more emotional stories of loyalty, courage, and bonds that never break, even through blood and fear. Jack Turner hadn't expected visitors that night. At 71, his days of chaos were supposed to be behind him. His retirement home sat on the edge of a quiet mountain community. Acres of pine, a view of the lake, and silence thick enough to hear your own heartbeat. After a lifetime of serving overseas, peace was the one thing he thought he'd finally earned. But peace shattered the moment he opened that door. The old German shepherd lay trembling in his arms, his breath shallow and wet. Jack recognized him instantly. Buddy, the stray that belonged to no one and everyone at once. People fed him scraps. Kids played with him in the summer, and Jack sometimes found him sleeping beneath his porch when storms rolled in. The dog never asked for anything. Until tonight. Jack's instincts kicked in. He carried Buddy inside, laid him gently on a blanket near the fireplace, and reached for his emergency medical kit. His hands shook, not out of fear but out of memory. There was a time he'd treated wounds in the middle of gunfire, stitching with trembling fingers while explosions shook the dirt beneath him. But he had never expected to do that again, especially not for a dog. Buddy winced when Jack cleaned the deepest gashes. Blood darkened the towel beneath him. The injuries weren't from barbed wire or fall. Jack recognized animal attacks when he saw them. Claw marks, deep ones. A predator. A big one. His flashlight beam swept the room until it found a tiny figure curled against the corner wall. A child. Silent. Afraid. Jack's breath caught. Just minutes earlier, he hadn't known anyone else existed beyond Buddy's collapsed body. Now he was staring at a life he was completely unprepared for. "Hey!" Jack whispered gently, crouching down. "You're safe here." "I'm Jack, what's your name?" The child didn't answer. Small fists clutched the blanket tighter, eyes fixed on Buddy as if the dog were the only solid thing in the world. Jack grabbed another blanket and draped it over the kid's shoulders. Thin arms, far too thin, slipped inside. The child's face was pale, smeared with dirt, eyes red from crying. Buddy let out a low rumble. Not a growl, but a warning. He tried to stand, stumbling before his legs gave out. He stared at Jack as if begging him to understand. Protect the child. Don't let anyone take them. Please. Jack swallowed the lump in his chest. "I've got you both," he murmured, though the truth was he had no clue what he was up against. The phone sat on the counter, but his hand hovered above it, frozen. What it calling emergency services meant someone else would come knocking. Someone Buddy had fought? Someone who wanted the child badly enough to spill blood? The kid finally spoke, a voice so faint he almost missed it. "They chased us." Jack turned slowly. "Who chased you?" The child pressed a trembling hand into Buddy's fur. "Men in trucks." "Buddy saved me." Buddy's ears twitched at the sound of his name. Jack sat back on his heels, processing every detail. Men in trucks. A child alone in the woods. A dog mauled defending them. His cabin suddenly felt far smaller. "What's your name, sweetheart?" Jack asked again. This time the answer came. "Mason." Just one word, but enough to make the situation painfully real. "How old are you, Mason?" "6. Jack's throat tightened. "Where's your family, Mason?" The boy didn't answer. Buddy's breathing stuttered, a soft whimper leaving his throat. Jack rushed back to him, tightening the bandage around the deepest wound. Buddy's eyes locked onto his, filled with pain but also determination. "Don't worry about me. Protect him." Jack wiped his brow and sat back, mind racing. Someone had hurt this dog. Someone had chased this child. Someone had been willing to kill. And they didn't know where those men were now. Outside, wind pressed against the windows, a reminder that the night wasn't over. Darkness pooled in every corner of the cabin, heavy and listening. Jack stood to check the front door, making sure the lock clicked firmly into place. He shut the curtains, dimmed the lights, rechecked the rifle he thought he'd never need again. Then he sat beside Mason and Buddy, listening to the storm gather strength. "You're safe here," he promised again, softer. "No one's getting past me." Buddy exhaled through his nose, a small, grateful sound. Mason finally leaned into Jack's side, exhaustion winning over fear. The retired Marine wrapped an arm around him, staring into the firelight as it flickered across the walls. He didn't know how long they sat like that, the three of them breathing together. Wounded dog, orphan boy, and an old man who thought he'd already seen the worst the world could offer. But something deep in Jack's gut, the same instinct that had kept him alive in war, whispered a warning. This wasn't over. The danger hadn't passed. And whatever Buddy had protected Mason from was still out there. Jack didn't sleep. He sat in his old armchair with the rifle across his lap, eyes fixed on the door as the wind clawed at the roof. Mason slept curled against Buddy's side, his small hand gripping the dog's fur like an anchor in a storm. Buddy, though exhausted and bleeding, kept his head slightly raised, watchful, determined not to close his eyes for too long. Jack's cabin had always felt like a sanctuary, but now every creak would felt like a threat. Every gust of wind sounded like footsteps. He rose quietly and moved toward the window, just enough to pull the curtain back with 2 fingers. Dark pines stretched into night, their shadows long and shifting under the moonlight. For a moment, nothing seemed out of place. Then he saw it, a pair of headlights, low, slow, cutting through the trees. Jack's breath caught. The truck crawled forward with deliberate caution, moving without its engine revving, without tires crunching loudly over the snow. Whoever was driving knew how to stalk. Buddy's ears perked. A low, rumbling warning vibrated in his chest. Jack let the curtain fall. He crouched beside Buddy. "You know them, don't you?" he whispered. Buddy blinked once in confirmation. Mason stirred, awakened by the tension thickening the air. His eyes widened in terror as he clung tighter to Buddy. "They found us," he whispered. Jack swallowed hard, trying to think fast. "How many men?" he asked quietly. "I don't know, 3? Maybe 4, Mason stammered. We were in a house before. They told me I had to go with them. Buddy attacked them so I could run." Jack placed a steady hand on Mason's shoulder. "You did good." And he did better. Buddy let out a soft whimper as he shifted, his wounds reopening slightly. Blood seeped again through the bandage. Jack grit his teeth. They didn't have time to treat him properly here. He made a decision. "We're leaving," he said abruptly. Mason's eyes widened. "Where?" Jack scanned the small cabin. The front door and back door both faced the woods, but the men would expect that. There was one option they didn't know about. The emergency escape hatch in the bedroom floor, a relic from Jack's survivalist days. Buddy tried to stand, but nearly collapsed again. Jack slid his arms under the dog, lifting him with a grunt. Buddy was heavy, old and muscular despite the weight he had lost, but Jack refused to let him fall. Mason grabbed a blanket, wrapped around him, and hurried after Jack. They moved into the bedroom, where Jack shoved aside an old cedar chest, revealing a square hatch built into the floorboards. A metal ring served as the handle. Jack yanked it open, revealing a narrow staircase leading into a small underground workshop. "Inside," he ordered. Mason climbed down first, looking up anxiously until Jack helped lower Buddy into his arms. The dog whimpered but did not protest. Jack climbed in last, pulling the hatch closed above them. The darkness swallowed them until Jack switched on a small emergency lantern. The space was tight, shelves of old supplies, canned goods, and tools lining the walls. A second door sat at the far end, leading into a small tunnel that opened deeper into the woods, concealed under brush. Jack listened. The house above them creaked with more than just wind now. Boots. Slow. Searching. Confident. Mason trembled, burying his face into Buddy's shoulder. Buddy licked the boy's cheek, keeping him calm despite his own pain. Jack turned to the side wall and pulled down a dusty backpack, one he hadn't touched in years. Inside, a med kit, a flashlight, spare clothes, and one more thing he hoped he would never need again, a small sidearm from his service days, still loaded. He strapped it to his belt. "What do they want with you, Mason?" Jack asked, crouching down so he could look the boy in the eyes. Mason's lower lip shook. It took him a moment to find the strength to speak. "They took me because of my dad." Jack's heart clenched. "Your dad? He owed them money," Mason whispered. "When he died, they came for me instead." Jack felt a cold fury rise inside him, a fire he thought retirement had extinguished. "They wanted to sell me," Mason choked out, voice cracking. "Buddy saved me. He bit them and we ran." Buddy lifted his head, breathing hard through the pain. His loyalty burned through his eyes like a vow. Jack gently squeezed Mason's shoulder. "They're not taking you. Not ever." A sudden crash sounded from above, the front door being kicked in. Jack's jaw locked tight. "We leave. Now." He helped Buddy onto his feet, cradling as much of the dog's weight as he could. Mason held the lantern and led the way toward the small tunnel door. But before they reached it, a pounding shook the hatch above. Dust fell around them as someone tested the hidden entrance. They found the hatch. Jack cursed under his breath. "Go!" He pushed Mason and Buddy into the tunnel first. Mason crawled through quickly, Buddy following with Jack guiding his body forward. Jack slipped in last, dragging the lantern behind him. The tunnel was narrow, forcing him to move on hands and knees. The lantern flickered, shadows dancing over the rough earth walls. Behind them, the hatch finally gave way. Voices erupted, angry, determined. "Hurry!" Jack hissed. Mason reached the end of the tunnel, a wooden board covered in roots. He shoved it upward, the cold night air rushing in. They crawled into the open forest, breathless and covered in dirt. As Buddy collapsed in the snow beside them, the cabin door slammed above them. Flashlights swept across the clearing. "They're close," Mason whispered, eyes full of terror. Jack lifted Buddy again, pushing forward into the trees. He didn't know where he was going, only what he refused to let happen. He wouldn't lose another life on his watch. Not the boy, not the dog, not tonight. Snow swallowed their footprints as fast as they made them. Jack's boots sank deep into the forest floor with every step, but he didn't slow down. He carried Buddy against his chest, arms burning with the weight, lungs scorched by the icy air. Mason ran beside him, one hand gripping Jack's coat, so they wouldn't be separated in the dark. Flashlights waved behind them. Searching, closing in, Jack ducked behind a fallen pine, lowering Buddy gently onto the snow. The old dog whimpered, but didn't cry out. Even now, hurting more than ever, he fought to stay silent. Jack crouched low and looked back. Through the branches, he could see figures crossing the clearing near his cabin. 3 men, just like Mason said. Their voices were muffled but angry, clear enough to confirm one thing. They weren't giving up. "Jack," Mason whispered, hugging the blanket around his shoulders. "They'll find us?" Jack shook his head. "Not if I can help it." He unzipped Buddy's bandage and checked the wounds again. The bleeding had slowed, but infection wasn't far behind. Buddy's gaze stayed sharp on Jack's face, like he was trying to communicate something deeper than pain. Jack ran his hand down the dog's neck and stopped. His fingers brushed something foreign beneath the fur. A hard object. Thin. Cold. "Mason, hold the lantern steady," Jack whispered. Mason knelt beside him, hands trembling as he lifted the light. Jack gently pushed aside more fur, and his breath froze. A small tracking device, strapped beneath Buddy's collar. Jack's stomach twisted. The men weren't just chasing them. They were tracking them. Buddy let out a low growl. Not towards Jack, but toward the menace represented by that device. He had known. That's why he kept urging them to move. They put this on him, Jack murmured, fury building like a storm inside his chest. They needed him to lead them. Mason's eyes widened. He didn't want to bring them to us. He tried to protect me. He's still protecting you, Jack said. He ripped the tracker off and smashed it against a rock. Sparks flickered before the device died, lights fading into the snow. But that didn't solve the problem. The men had already seen their direction. They were following. Buddy tried to stand again, teeth clenched, determined to keep fighting. Jack placed a firm hand on his back. "No," he said softly. "You've done enough tonight." The dog relaxed reluctantly, trusting Jack to lead now. He turned to Mason. "We need to get somewhere safe, somewhere they can't easily reach." Mason sniffled and wiped his nose on his sleeve. "Where?" Jack looked deeper into the forest. Toward darkness he knew better than anyone. "There's an old ranger station," he said. "Haven't used it in years, but it's got a radio. Reinforced doors. Supplies." Mason nodded quickly, eyes desperate for hope. Jack scooped Buddy into his arms again, ignoring the spike of pain shooting down his spine. "Stay right next to me. No wandering. And if I say run—" "I run," Mason whispered. Jack gave a tight nod. "Good. Let's move." They slipped deeper into the trees. Snow whirled around them like ash from a burning world. Branches cracked behind them, too heavy for wind. Jack pressed Mason behind a thick cedar as he lowered Buddy. They both crouched, breaths held. Flashlights swept to the woods in the distance. 3 beams, slicing through the dark like knives. "There!" a man shouted. "Tracks." Jack closed his eyes, willing silence into their lungs, their hearts, everything. "We should split up," another voice called out. "Find the boy." The boy. Not Buddy. Not Jack. Just Mason. Jack felt something inside him snap. A protective instinct older than fear itself. The men's footsteps spread out. One set moved closer than the rest. Too close. Jack's hand went to his sidearm. He didn't want to use it. But if he had to... A crunch of snow. A figure stepped within 10 feet. Scanning the trees with a flashlight and a handgun. Jack steadied his breathing. Mason pressed his face into Buddy's fur to hide his sobs. The man took another step. Jack's finger tightened on the trigger. And then a howl tore through the night. Loud. Haunting. Close. The man froze, swinging his flashlight wildly. What the hell was that? Another howl answered. Then another, scattered through the trees. Wolves. Real ones. Buddy's ears flicked toward the sound, eyes narrowing with understanding. This was their territory, the reason he had been attacked. He must have crossed their path earlier, protecting Mason. The other men regrouped quickly, shouting nervously. "Forget the dog. We need to finish the job and get out. We don't have time for wolves." "Find the boy." Jack held Mason close as the wolves howled again, closer this time, surrounding the area. Nature was shifting the balance. Buddy's eyes gleamed faintly. He knew these woods better than the men did. He wasn't scared of the howls. Not anymore. Jack leaned in close. "We move now," he whispered. He lifted Buddy once more, body burning with effort, and motioned for Mason to keep low. They hurried deeper into the forest, guided now by more than just Jack's memory, guided by instinct, by the survival of a child, by the courage of a dog who refused to stop fighting. Behind them, the howls grew into chaos. Men yelling, wolves circling. Mason looked up at Jack, voice trembling. Will they hurt them? Jack didn't look back. "They'll keep them busy," he said. "We're not alone out here." Ahead, beyond the next ridge, a faint light flickered. The old ranger station. Safe haven, if they could reach it in time. The ranger station emerged from the shadows like a memory Jack wasn't sure he wanted to face again. It stood atop a rocky incline, its old watchtower rising toward the moonlit clouds. a skeleton of his former life. He could almost hear radio static, see maps pinned to the wall, smell coffee brewing through sleepless nights. Years ago, this place had been protection, purpose, command. Now it was his only chance to keep Mason and Buddy alive. Almost there, Jack whispered, though his lungs burned and his arms shook from carrying Buddy. The shepherd's breath rattled harshly. He was slipping fast. The climb was steep. Snow slid under their boots, shale shifting with each step. Mason stumbled once, catching himself against a rock. Jack paused, crouching low to give Buddy a moment to adjust his weight. We're safe here, right? Mason asked, voice trembling but hopeful. Jack looked up at the watchtower windows, dark and lifeless. We will be, he said, once we get inside. He forced himself forward. When they reached the door, Jack shifted Buddy into one arm and rummaged through a rusty metal box tucked under the eaves. After a tense moment, success. A key. He jammed it into the lock, praying the mechanism hadn't frozen solid with time. The knob turned. They stumbled inside. Warmth didn't greet them. The station was colder than outside, but it was shelter. Solid walls, reinforced windows, and a heavy metal door that could buy them time if necessary. Jack shut it tight and slid the iron bar down with a thud. Mason flicked on the lantern, holding it high as he scanned the room. Old desks, filing cabinets, a cot shoved into the corner, dust covering everything. Looks safe, he said, almost convincing himself. Jack set Buddy on the cot. We need to get him stable. He pulled medical supplies from a storage crate, old but usable. Gloves, iodine dressings. He swallowed hard as he saw Buddy's eyes drooping. Don't you dare give up on me, Jack muttered. You hear me, soldier? Buddy's ear twitched. His loyalty didn't allow surrender. Jack cleaned the wounds again, this time more thoroughly. Fighting back nausea as fresh blood slicked his hands. Mason hovered nearby, sleeves pulled to his fists, watching with wide, terrified eyes. Is he gonna die? He whispered. Jack froze. He wished he could lie. We're gonna do everything we can, he finally said, voice tight. But he's strong. Stronger than he looks. Buddy's gaze shifted to Mason, and for a moment there was only silence, a silent promise exchange between boy and dog. Jack taped gauze over the last wound, then brushed a hand through Buddy's fur. He protected you, Jack said quietly. That kind of loyalty doesn't come without a reason. Mason wiped his eyes. He didn't even know me. We met only days ago. Jack sat back. Some souls recognized each other fast. A sudden clatter echoed from outside. Icy branches snapping, snow crunching under heavy boots. Jack moved instantly, lantern dimmed, rifle raised. He peered through a slit in the boarded window. At least 2 men moved along the lower ridge, flashlights sweeping upward, searching. Jack's pulse hammered. They were closer than he thought. Mason crawled beside him, staring out with wide eyes. Do they want me because of my dad? Jack didn't look away from the intruders. What exactly did he owe them? Mason swallowed hard. My dad used to meet with them a lot. He changed, yelled more, got scared about everything. He rubbed his arm anxiously. Then one night, he told me to hide in the closet. Said he'd come back. But he never did. Buddy let out a soft whine, shifting slightly, the sound grounding Mason enough to breathe again. Jack lowered the curtain and faced the boy. Whatever your father got into wasn't your fault. They want leverage, power. You're not a debt. You're a child. Mason blinked up at him. Then why does it feel like everything bad happens because of me? Jack leaned forward. His voice softened into something fatherly, something he hadn't used in years. Bad men make bad choices. You didn't cause this. You're the reason Buddy risked everything. You're the reason we're still fighting. Mason looked at Buddy, and a spark of courage lit behind his tears. Jack checked his watch. We have a narrow window. They'll lose our trail when they reach the stream below, at least for a while. He set his jaw. We need help. Real help. He crossed the room to the old radio transmitter mounted to the wall, blowing dust from its controls. He flipped switches and adjusted the antenna angle. Static crackled through the speaker. Jack's fingers danced over dials with muscle memory he didn't realize he still had. "This is Ranger Outpost 17 requesting immediate law enforcement assistance," he said, voice firm. "Urgent child endangerment and armed pursuit. Coordinates pending." Static, then a faint voice. "Copy. Ranger Outpost 17. Transmission weak. Please repeat." Jack exhaled in relief. We're not alone anymore. But just as hope flickered to life, Buddy lifted his head, ears pricking sharply. Jack paused. Another sound joined the static. Knocking. Slow. Deliberate. On the metal door behind them. Mason gasped, nearly dropping the lantern. Jack lifted his rifle again, stepping between the boy and the noise. Buddy struggled but forced himself upright, planting his paws beside Jack's boot, standing despite agony. The knocking grew harder. Whoever stood outside wasn't cold, wasn't desperate, wasn't afraid. They wanted to be heard. Jack tightened his grip on the rifle. "Stay behind me," he whispered. Mason and Buddy didn't move. The knocking stopped. Silence flooded in. A pause, a breath, a heartbeat, then a voice, low, calm, chilling. "Give us the boy." The ranger station felt smaller than ever. The metal door rattled with each pounding knock, the hinges whining under the pressure. Mason clutched Buddy's fur, shrinking behind Jack as the old Marine leveled his rifle at the entrance. But the shaking in his arms wasn't fear. It was anger. He had seen monsters before. Men who believed they could take what wasn't theirs. Men who hid behind threats and weapons. But this was different. This time, the monster wanted a child. Jack Turner. The voice outside called, calm but poisonous, like a snake sliding across snow. "We don't want to fight. Just hand over the boy." Jack's pulse stalled. They knew his name. "How do you know who I am?" he demanded. Silence stretched a long, dreadful moment. Then, "We know everyone in this town. We know who minds their business and who doesn't." Jack tightened his grip. "The only thing I mind is scum preying on children." A low chuckle filtered through the metal. "You think you're protecting him? You're only making this harder. That boy's father owed a debt bigger than you can imagine. A man doesn't die without passing the bill." Mason shook his head violently, tears streaming. "I didn't do anything. I didn't." Jack crouched, calming the boy with a hand on his shoulder. "Listen to me," he whispered. "You're not responsible for any of this." Buddy growled softly, not loud, because even in rage he understood silence was survival. The man outside sighed dramatically, as if exhausted by Jack's defiance. "You can't keep him. We're taking what's ours." Jack stood straight again. "Come and try." He heard footsteps crunching in the snow, not retreating, spreading out. They were surrounding the station. Mason's breathing grew frantic. Jack grabbed a wool hat from the emergency kit and pulled it gently over the boy's head. "Eyes on me," he said firmly. "We got one advantage. They can't get through that door without tools. They didn't come here expecting resistance." "How do you know?" Mason rasped. Jack managed a thin, grim smile. "Because I used to be them." Buddy's tail thumped softly, the closest he could get to a nod. Jack returned to the radio. "Ranger Outpost 17. Need immediate backup. Armed men on site. Child hostage situation." Static. A pause. Then clarity. "Copy that. Outpost 17. Units inbound. Hold position. ETA 12 minutes. 12 minutes. A lifetime when death scratches on your door. A metallic clang. One of the men had picked up something heavy, maybe a crowbar, and slammed it against the door, testing its strength. Jack's heart hammered. The radio crackled again, faint voices talking over each other, then cut out completely. "Signal jammer," Jack muttered through his teeth. "They're prepared." Another slam. Harder. Cracks forming in the frame. Buddy whimpered but pushed himself upright again, bracing in front of Mason as though to say, "They will have to get through me first." Jack leaned close to the dog. "You've done enough. You need to rest." Buddy stared at him, unblinking. Rest was not an option. Jack swallowed the lump in his throat. He turned to Mason. "There's a trapdoor in the floor. Leads to an old root cellar. If they breach the door, you take Buddy and hide there. What about you? Mason asked, voice cracking. Jack met his eyes, steady, unafraid. I'll make sure they never get to you. Mason grabbed his shirt. Don't leave us. I won't, Jack promised. Not unless I have to. The pounding intensified. A bolt jolted loose. Another strike, and this time the door bowed inward. We don't have to hurt the dog, the man taunted. He saved you once. Let him die a hero. Buddy barked, a sharp, furious sound that echoed off the walls. Mason flinched, but Jack smiled. That's right, he whispered. You tell them. The lock strained. One more hit would break it. Jack's mind raced. Fight? Flee? Delay? He grabbed a flare gun from the emergency shelf, old but functional, and fired it straight into the ceiling above the door. Flame and sparks rained down. Smoke thickened the air. The men outside cursed and stumbled back, startled. Jack seized a moment. He dragged a metal filing cabinet in front of the door, barricading it further. The flare burned, screeching loudly, warning the wolves in the forest and the cops en route that something was happening here. For a moment, there was quiet again. The voice returned, colder than the storm outside. You've made your choice, Jack. We finish this now. A loud engine revved. Jack's eyes widened. They weren't trying to pick the lock anymore. They were going to ram the door with the truck. He looked at Mason. Get under the trapdoor. Now. But... now. Mason scrambled to the floor hatch and pulled it open. Buddy started toward it, then stopped halfway, staring back at Jack. Jack knelt, placing his forehead gently against Buddy's. You saved him, he whispered. Now let me save both of you. Buddy hesitated, then obeyed, limping down into the darkness beside Mason. The boy looked up, tears blurring his vision. Jack, please. Jack forced a smile. I got one more fight in me. He slid the trapdoor shut. Right as headlights glared through the window, the truck accelerated. Jack braced himself, gripping the rifle. He took one steady breath. For them, he whispered. The truck slammed into the door with a deafening explosion of metal and snow, and the world shook apart. The crash blasted through the station like a bomb. Metal screamed. The filing cabinet toppled. Glass shattered from the windows as snow burst inside, swirling through smoke and dust. Jack's ears rang, body thrown hard against the radio desk. For a moment, all he could hear was the sharp wheeze of his own breath. Boots pounded on the floorboards. Voices, aggressive, frantic. Find the boy. The old man's down. Jack pushed himself upright, ribs blazing with pain. He tasted blood, something hot and metallic smearing his tongue as he pulled himself behind an overturned table. The rifle was still in his grip. His finger found the trigger. 3 intruders stormed in, silhouettes against the fractured moonlight. Jack didn't aim to kill. He aimed to protect. One shot cracked through the station, hitting the first intruder in the leg. He collapsed, screaming. The second fired wildly in response, bullets ricocheting off the file cabinets with sparks. Jack ducked lower, breathing through the pain. Come on, Turner. You survived war. This isn't where you fall. The third man lunged forward, swinging a crowbar. Jack blocked the blow with the rifle, the force rattling through his bones. They grappled. Jack old but experienced, the attacker younger but reckless. Jack twisted, using the attacker's own weight to slam him into a concrete post. The man crumpled, unconscious. Gunfire erupted again, the second intruder firing blindly. Jack dug behind a desk, bullets tearing into it inches from his skull. He had one shot left. He waited, listening. Footsteps approached the trapdoor, the intruder realizing where Mason and Buddy were hiding. Jack fired. The bullet struck the man's shoulder. The gun clattered from his hand. He staggered, but did not fall. You can't stop us, the intruder growled, grabbing a knife from his boot. Jack reached for anything that could be a weapon, his hand closing on a heavy flare canister. He hurled it with all the strength he had left. It struck the intruder square in the face. The man dropped like dead weight. Silence, except for Jack's heavy breathing. It was over. Sirens wailed outside. Police vehicles tearing through the snow, tires skidding as they stopped just beyond the shattered entrance. Police, drop your weapon. Jack lowered the rifle instantly, raising his hands. Officers swarmed in, shouting commands, tackling the wounded intruders and cuffing them swiftly. The chaos ebbed into relief. The trapdoor burst open. Mason climbed out first, eyes wide and terrified. He sprinted to Jack and threw his arms around him, nearly knocking the old Marine back. "You're alive," Mason sobbed. "You're alive." Jack placed a gentle hand on the kid's back. "Of course I am. I promised, didn't I?" Buddy struggled next, but the officers quickly helped lift the dog out. His breathing was weak, but his eyes were still fierce, still watching over Mason. Paramedics rushed forward, tending to Jack and Buddy. Mason stayed at Buddy's side, never letting go of his fur. One officer approached Jack, shaking his head in disbelief. "You held off 3 armed men alone." Jack looked past him to the old German, shepherd on the stretcher. "I wasn't alone," he said. They transported all 3 to safety. Mason to a warm bed and medical check. Buddy straight into emergency veterinary care. Jack into a hospital room where the lights buzzed comfort instead of danger. Morning brought news. Buddy survived surgery. He would walk again. He would live. Mason refused to leave his side, and Jack stayed with them both. Days later, a social worker sat across from Jack, smiling at the sight of the dog sleeping with his head on Mason's lap. "He needs a guardian," she said gently. "He trusts you. Would you consider?" Jack didn't let her finish. "He's already home." Mason looked up, tears welling. Not from fear this time, but from something he hadn't felt in far too long. Belonging. Jack rested a hand on Buddy's head. The dog opened his eyes, tail thumping weakly. "You did it, old friend," Jack whispered. "You brought him to me." Outside, snow melted under the first light of spring. A new life was beginning, stitched together by courage, loyalty, and a love strong enough to fight through blood and darkness. Some heroes were uniforms. Others were scars. Buddy wore fur, and he had saved them all. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share with someone who believes true loyalty never ages. And family isn't always born. Sometimes it's found.